Hello Internet, welcome to THAME GEORY, the evil version of game theory that's hosted by me, everyone's favorite gearist, TapTam. So, Five Nights at Freddy's, what's up with that? I mean, these games suck and they suck hard, so let's talk about them a lot. Because today I have a geary for you, one that I think is worth watching, and one that solves the biggest mystery that's relevant among the FNaF community, Midnight Motorist. For those not in the know, on December 4th of 2017, Scott Cawthon released Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, a game that had been teased for some time by then. It had been a long time coming given the reception of Scott's previous, and possibly largest project at that point in the FNaF series, Sister Location. Scott had implied that he would be stepping back from the horror of the series for a moment to try and put together something more in his element, like a tycoon game. It was a funny enough thought given the FNaF series' roots in Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, the last game Scott made before FNaF that was in fact a tycoon game. So nobody really expected anything huge from Pizza Sim upon its release, but man, were they just wrong. If you're a FNaF fan now, you're probably aware that Pizza Sim was a combination of a troll game and a real FNaF game, with Scott playing a prank on his fanbase by surprising them beyond their wildest expectations. This tycoon wasn't just a tycoon. It was a web of 3 unique gameplay styles that also acted as the finale of the FNaF story, tying up loose ends and setting it all ablaze. However, with all this tying of loose ends, new ones were created. The Candy Cadet stories were seemingly insolvable, with the band-aid solution being that they were talking about Ennard. The animatronics are all in the vents, but how did Springtrap start looking like a bulldog? And the mother of all mysteries, Midnight Motorist. During the Tycoon section of the game, you were able to purchase an arcade cabinet called Midnight Motorist. It's a fun little racing game that has you thread the needle between cars as you try and rack up a high score over the course of several laps. However, in the final lap you may notice a break in the highway's border. If you cross into that border while driving, you will be brought into a secret minigame which the files of the game refer to as Later That Night. During Later That Night, you drive a purple car and you're capable of visiting 3 locations. The first is an empty field with a mound of dirt, which we'll definitely be talking about later on. Promise. Next is someplace called Junior's, where a green man tells you that you aren't allowed in there, and asks that you not make things difficult. And last of all is your character's house, where you march in to yell at your son only to find he's not there. If you go around back, you'll find a set of human footprints and animatronic footprints, with the glass broken. It seems the kid ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he comes back. And that's all there is to it. Now tell me, where does this fit in the FNaF story? And that's the big thing a lot of theorists are scratching their heads about. But as your resident THAME gearist, I think I can figure it out. Let's look at what Later That Night tells us, what it omits, and what we can fill in ourselves. First off, what do we 100% know about Later That Night? It takes place on a rainy night. Your character is yellow. He drives a purple car, he is not allowed at Junior's, he lives in a house, he has a son. There is a mound of dirt he knows how to get to. His son is not allowed to shut his door. He plans on punishing his son for running off to that place when he gets back. Scene. And from this we can definitely start piecing some elements together. Now, it should not come off as surprising that the main interpretation people have of the yellow guy is that he is an abusive parent. He yells, pounds on his son's door, he told him not to close it, and when he goes around back, it's so he can get into his son's room, never mind that it's raining out. This has also led a lot of speculation that Junior's may be a bar, and him not being allowed back in may be because he's a violent drunk. After all, this green guy is likely a bouncer, so Junior's is probably some kind of adult establishment. Now let's talk about everything left out. No character in this minigame is named, of which there are 4. Yellow guy, green guy, gray person, and the sun. We could also include the animatronic here as well, depending on how you interpret the situation, but since yellow guy never even mentions the footprints, I just didn't bring it up. Determining who these characters are, and especially yellow guy, is the primary mystery we're going to be solving today. We also aren't given a time period this minigame takes place in, which is very concerning considering Pizza Sim happens at like the very end of the original timeline, meaning it could be from any period before then. We also aren't told much about the dirt mound either. We don't know what Junior's is, and we don't know what Yellow Guy did to get kicked out of there. I already spoke on what many think Junior's is, but we have to keep in mind that that's just a theory, and we don't do theories on the THAME gearists. That just leaves us to figure out what Midnight Motorist is telling us through logic and reason. Let's start with that name, Later That Night. Later That Night implies something big. It implies that what happens here is something that happens later that night in relation to something that has already happened. Some big event that would be like, yeah, Golden Freddy simultaneously whipped a nay-nayed and later that night Yellow Guy drove home to yell at his kid. So what could this event be? Well, it could be something as simple as I was driving through 4-lane highway traffic and then later that night I got turned down at Junior's, which wouldn't really get us far. On the other hand, it could be later that night from another minigame, one where it's raining, one where the tracks left by a car are an important part of that minigame. It could be that there is a connection between the security puppet minigame and Midnight Motorist, which is important because the car in that case would be the car that belongs to William Afton. However, there's a slight problem with this, that being that throughout the entire FNaF series, whenever William is not in his spring Bonnie costume, he is always depicted as bright, vibrant purple, not yellow. Whether he's killing kids or just trying to help one of his employees put on a suit, William is a purple guy. This is how we're meant to identify him. So with this other guy being yellow, there would have to be some real earth-shattering evidence that points to him being William that I just can't see. But maybe he is William. Let's look at the context. At this point in time, the FNaF series had two distinct purple guys. One was rotting in a bunny costume, and one was rotting as a costume himself. These purple dudes, William and Michael. But because Scott hadn't clarified that these were two separate purple guys, it led to a big discussion about who the actual purple guy was, which led to the mic trap theory. Historically, this is one of the few times Scott had to outright declare a theory was wrong because of how he told his story. Mic trap was deconfirmed, and it was newly confirmed that there were two purple guys. But now we need to look at this scenario and how it relates to Pizza Sim. Is it possible that Scott changed William's color from purple to yellow for this game to make sure William wasn't confused for Mike? I don't think so, especially since every iteration of Afton after Pizza Sim connected back to the color purple in some big way. Whether it was a drawing of him as a purple sprite, or the accent colors of the Glitch Trap suit, or hell, Burn Trap's eyes being black but having bright purple pupils. Purple is still Afton's color, and I don't think Scott ever gave up on that. On top of that, we have seen where William Afton lives, and not only is the layout and exterior of the house different, it's geographically in a completely different spot. There's no sidewalks here and no Fredbears, just a dirt road and a bar. And you could say William moved here, but that feels like a lot of nitpicking garbage and doesn't explain why or when. If he moved here because of Crying Child's death, does that mean the runaway is Michael? I guess. If it's Elizabeth's death, that doesn't make sense since CC died while they were living in that FNaF 4 house. No matter how you cook it up, it either doesn't make sense or it's not satisfying. So with that in mind, I don't think the yellow guy is William. But let's see what Scott himself has to say, because we do actually have some comments from him on Midnight Motorist, just not in a very likely spot. This here is the FNaF Ultimate Guide, a collection of information regarding much of the FNaF series. It's a good book for people who just want the highlights reel version of each game and book. Although do try to get the latest version as it's the most up-to-date and changes a lot from its previous incarnations, the Freddy Files. But I do view this book as worthwhile evidence given that its one listed author is Scott Cawthon. That doesn't mean that there aren't other uncredited authors, but if Scott was willing to put his name on the book, I think we can accept it as proper evidence. It's got his stamp of approval. So let's look at some choice lines from the book regarding Midnight Motorist, lines that specifically relate to who the yellow guy is. Quote, "You can get out, you'll find that your character is yellow, not purple, and walk to an open spot in the trees. Midnight Motorist surprised fans by revealing that the driver of the purple car was yellow instead of the much anticipated purple guy. Some have theorized that the yellow guy is still William Afton, Springtrap is yellow after all, and that the gray person watching TV in the house is his son, Michael. I picked these lines because I think each of them tells us a little bit more than what they might at first glance. That first line, you'll find that your character is yellow, not purple, tells us that Scott knew we'd be expecting to play as the purple guy in this minigame. The same with the next line, the driver of the purple car was yellow instead of the much anticipated purple guy. But that final line is also really interesting to me, as it says the yellow guy is still William Afton, Springtrap is yellow after all. To me, this implies that if yellow guy really is William Afton, it's because he would have been wearing the Spring Bonnie costume, and that right there is ridiculous to me. If not because of the lack of rabbit ears, then because Springlock suits can't go out in the rain due to moisture being something that can weaken the Springlocks and cause a failure. All of this to say, it feels like yellow guy not being William Afton feels very purposeful. The purple car and the rain may have all been a red herring. Audiences were baited into thinking who they were about to see was William, only for it to be someone entirely different. So with that out of the way, what is later that night actually telling us? Well, let's shift things over to the runaway child and really examine what happened here. Whoever this kid is apparently has gone back to a place they've already been before and likely did so to escape his father. Those animatronic footprints as well imply that someone had come to the house and lured him out, possibly Afton in his Spring Bonnie costume, meaning that this kid would likely be one of the MCI kids. Do we have more evidence of this being the case? Yes, actually. Fast forward to Ultimate Custom Night, a game riddled with weird cutscenes, many of which feel like jokes, and many of which are just disturbing. But one set of cutscenes specifically has always just been seen as odd. Toy Chica, the high school years. This set of intermission cutscenes has Toy Chica recount the various ways in which she plans to trick guys at her school into falling in love with her. Each one starts with "he'll be mine by the end of the day," and ends with "there is only one thing that could possibly go wrong." But what we want to focus on is when Toy Chica recounts her plans with the puppet, where she says, "I told him to come over, that should be enough, and if he doesn't show up, I'll just go to his house, and if he doesn't open the door, I'll just find a window." It almost feels like context for Midnight Motorist. And with the common consensus of these cutscenes being that Toy Chica here is a stand-in for Afton, it definitely seems likely that the runaway was one of William's victims. And the final nail in the coffin? One of Toy Chica's final lines is the infamous "tomorrow is another day," a line that's repeated thoroughly by the Fredbear plush, a plush which sister location would then imply belonged to William Afton. And I think it's clear that on some level, Afton is involved with Toy Chica, and Toy Chica is involved with Midnight Motorist. So then, what's the story? Well, I think the runaway was one of the 5 missing kids. When William was luring kids away, there was one he wanted to get, but the kid was leaving, so William told him to come back later when the place was closed. However, the kid did not come back, so later that night, William came to his window and broke it in, convincing the child to come back with him to Freddy's. He managed to sneak the kid away before the rain started, possibly while his dad was still on the highway, but when Yellow Dad came back, all he found was the footprints and broken glass. On some level though, he knew where his son went back to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Now this begs the question, who is this kid? Well, if you ask me, I think it's likely that this runaway kid would have been Cassidy. Hear me out, the gears are turning and it's time to make a THAME Geary. Cassidy was the birthday boy, someone who William specifically wanted to capture and kill. However, he knew that killing the kid at his birthday party surrounded might be too much. There's no way he could get away with it. Plus, it seemed like this kid wasn't having a good day, maybe being bullied or yelled at. His friends that arrived started to vanish as if they had just left, which William totally had nothing to do with. Overall, it was a rough day. So William made Cassidy promise to come back later that night so they could have a much better party together. Just the two of them. Cassidy agreed, but he didn't come back, maybe too afraid of what his father might do. So William came to get him and brought him back to Freddy's, where he killed him and stuffed him in the last available suit, the yellow Fredbear. A yellow bear to match a yellow father. A big question has always been, why is Cassidy so vengeful? Why is Cassidy the one William should not have killed? And I think Midnight Motorist is our answer. Cassidy was an abused child who placed his trust in the last person he could, the yellow rabbit. So when it came time to follow William, he did. He paid the price, even if William had to come to collect it himself. But hey, that's just a Geary. A THAME Geary. Thanks for watching.